Inerrant. Most of us in this group, of course, accept the fact the Bible is the original texts are free of error. Well, I used to say that a lot when I was a teenager, and I ran into a guy who said, what about 1 Kings 7:23? 1 Kings 7:23 speaks of this big, huge bronze laver or bowl or molten sea, molten meaning it's cast, and sea being full of water. It was 10 cubits in diameter and 5 cubits deep. 5 cubits about 1.5 feet. But the problem with that verse 23, it says the circumference is 3 times the diameter. Now, any schoolboy knows that can't be right. That's technically in there. Not a big deal, but it's wrong. Every schoolboy knows that the diameter, that the circumference is not 3 times the diameter, it's pi times the diameter. Pi is a very peculiar number. Most people may not remember it was 3.14159265358,979. But most of us in school either use 3.16 or 3.159 or often 22 sevenths, 3 1/7 as approximation. And that's what most of us did in school. But it certainly isn't 3 times. And so part of the problem, this is not a big deal, but the accusations made by the skeptics, look, there's an error in the Bible. Well, I didn't know how to answer this. I just had to accept it until I got into graduate school and whatever. And a rabbi happened to point out something interesting to me, because I had trouble with this. Here's the molten sea, 10 cubits from one brim to the other, and it was round all about, and its height was 5 cubits, and a line 30 cubits did compass it round, the circumference. In the Hebrew, it's misspelled. The Masoretes, when they found a word in the text they were copying that was apparently wrong, they didn't correct it, they marked it. And they put in the margin what apparently was the correct version. The mistake, apparent mistake, or the error, the variant I'll call it, was called a kathif. And the correct version was called a kiri. And what's interesting when you study this, you also need to understand that Hebrew, like both Hebrew and Greek, are distinctive in that every letter in the alphabet has a numerical value. And that one of the applications of that fact is that they would add up the numbers on a page, and if it didn't add up to the one they were copying, they would burn it and start over. They didn't try to correct it. In other words, they were really very rigorous. The rigor of the scribes is something to be really applauded at. And that's why the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they were discovered, had a complete copy of the book of Isaiah, and I think there were 4 letters different. Over hundreds of years in many copying, because of the rigor and the commitment of these scribes. It's the commitment to perfection. Well, if you go through these letters, it turns out that the kathiv, that is the written variation, is a kaf, a vav, and a he. And the way it should be spelled is just with a kaf and a vav. Now, a kaf and a vav would be, the value for kiri should be 106. But here they've added a he at the end of the word. Now, you can't even tell because it's just a breath. It's like putting the H at the end of a word. Often does, you can't tell it's there in pronunciation. But the he has a value of 5. And by the way, the he is also the breath or spirit too, by the way. But that's a whole other thing we'll get into some other time. So kiri should be 106, but the way it's spelled is 111. And when you apply that correction to the text, it says that the circumference was 31.415 and some other things. In other words, we have a circumference of 46 feet that is expressed with an error of less than 15 thousandths of an inch. And that's a lot better than we would have gotten if we'd used 22 sevenths as an approximation. The precision is frankly astonishing. And so a little spelling lesson. I might mention just in passing that there's another place that pi appears in the Bible text. Pi is one of the dimensionless ratios. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, is Genesis 1:1. And if you take that in the Hebrew, and you take the number of letters times the product of the letters and divide it by the number of words and times the product of the words, you get pi to 4 decimal places. That's rather bizarre. There's another place in John 1:1. If you do the same thing with John 1:1, you get the value of e, the base of Napierian logarithms, another dimensionless constant in the universe, to 4 decimal places. But let's move on. So that's pi. Interesting. I don't know what you do with that. I just throw it in there to, no extra charge. Okay.